Alrighty, everyone. Well, happy Thursday. Welcome to another Spearbit educational seminar. I'm Spencer from the Spearbit team, and we have Vaibhav Chellani from Socket.tech. He's going to speak about bridges, the bridge risk framework, and some of the security implications of bridges that have been pretty well reported in the space as of late. So, Vaibhav, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys, for having me. Yeah, we've been kind of suffering bridge hacks right and left for a while now. And like we at Socket, one of our jobs is to kind of aggregate all asset-based bridges, and we thought it's our responsibility to clearly convey what trade-off a particular asset bridge is making, so that users don't get wrecked. This is still an ongoing motion, a still ongoing effort that we are trying to push. But hopefully by the time we are done with it, people will be able to clearly and transparently see what's up with this new bridge that they're trying. And a lot of these hacks that we are kind of seeing on an everyday basis, these start getting reducing more and more. Just more like transparency in the space is like absolutely needed, because like creating a bridge is like extremely easy, right? But creating a trustless and a secure one is extremely hard. So a lot of people, try to market things like they are not. A lot of people try to hide things, and we just need like a bunch of researchers, trying to evaluate bridges and like making it easy to understand for the whole ecosystem, for the users that are trying to use these infrastructure systems. Yeah, so the way we started thinking about this was, okay, like a good amount of crypto Twitter understands all of like how these different kind of bridges are different. What are the security properties? What's the trust that these systems make? What are the trust assumptions that these systems make? But a lot of users don't. And since it sounds so complicated, a lot of users don't want to, right? Let me kind of really kind of dial home on like what our final vision is, because of which we are trying to, make this happen. So we have this thing called Bungee Exchange, which is essentially like a asset bridge aggregator. And our goal here is to kind of transparently show, things about that particular bridge. We try to abstract away a bridge into three things, right? Latency. There's some disturbance from yours. Yeah, sorry about that, but yeah, we try to abstract away an asset bridge from in three things. One is latency, one is cost, and one is security, right? So in the current, like the screen that I've shared right now, we showcase both the latency that's right here and the cost cost that it takes to use this bridge. For example, for across, it takes like $4. For hop, it takes like $7, things like that, right? But we really wanted to showcase security properties alongside with it. And one of the reasons why we show like routes in this fashion is because all of these routes have different security properties, and we cannot abstract away bridges right now. So we ask people to manually kind of, select hop here, right? If they want to, right? Because we cannot automate this whole thing. So it started from like a mindset of like how to not get the users to like kind of opt in into security of like a particular bridge every time you try to use Bungee Exchange, right? So you want to move this whole system into like a settings configuration here, such that, how you set slippages on dexes right now, you would be able to set security tolerances, right? So we would assign all of these bridges a score out of, let's say, 5 or 10. And you as a user, you can basically say that I only want to see routes which have been assigned a security score of, let's say, 3.5 and above, right? That kind of makes the whole experience better. And you don't have to think about how secure a bridge is every time you're trying to use Bungee Exchange, right? So these were our motives, right? But we got down to, trying to actually see how we could, kind of make this happen. And we landed with a pretty exciting and a pretty complicated framework. Yeah, I'll just let that open. This is like an earlier version of the whole thing. This is not the final version, but I'll get to the final version in a bit. We try to evaluate bridges in like 5 things. Hope you can, kind of see the whole thing. But generally, it's like security, performance, extractable value, because I think this is like a pretty underlooked topic at this point. I've been like writing about this on a couple of bridge forums, but I still think people don't think about this as seriously as it should. Uh, Fourth one is connectivity, meaning like how many chains does this bridge support? How easy is it for a particular bridge to support a new chain? And capabilities, does this bridge allow you to send ERC20s, NFTs? Does it allow you to make contract calls and things like that? So we wanted to kind of like abstract, kind of create a framework that talks about these 5 high level things. And the end goal was, of course, as I previously mentioned, to like um, get to a scoring that can be shown to the end user whenever they're trying to use money, right? Um, I kind of go into some details about like, how we think about these things, but I'll get to that in a bit. I want to show you like the final version that we did for a couple of bridges. This is what we landed with using this framework. We try to evaluate how any swap connects across Seabridge and Ren, and we try to score these things, right? And of course, this was not as simple as we thought it could be. It was pretty difficult to see differences or like kind of think about things like validator collusion, for example. And this is why we thought, especially for the security section, it's a pretty subjective manner, and doing like a scoring for it turned out to be extremely hard in an objective fashion. Everything else like performance, connectivity, capabilities, these are like pretty objective things that we can just like kind of think about by like seeing what the prices are, what the latency is on chain, and going into the docs of this particular protocol and things like that. But for security, we really felt we need like a more community oriented approach, more subjective opinions, and that's how we can only kind of come at abstract view. So we collaborated with the team at L2Beats to kind of create a forum. That forum, so we created like a proposal for L2Beats community together, and our objective there is to kind of use the L2Beat community, the excellent group of researchers that they have, to kind of reason about things better, and then kind of derive the security scores that we ultimately wanted to, right? Let me just kind of show you how that looks. This proposal is active right now. Would love if you guys can kind of check it out, give it a read. I'll be diving deep into it, so that should give you a good amount of context, but would love your like thoughts, whatever. Our hope is to kind of get this proposal accepted and start showing this information on L2Beats, as well as whatever things we try to do at Socket. This would create more awareness around like this whole topic and conversation generally. But yeah, now is a good time to deep dive into the proposal itself about like different kind of bridges, how that impacts things and things like that. But we'll quickly take a pause here to check if people have posted any questions. All right, sweet. Oh, perfect. What did you look at when measuring soundness of code? Yeah, it's pretty vague, to be honest. On our end, let me kind of show you how we thought about this thing. I don't know if we have anything here. Yeah, so there we go. So it was like basically things like number of code audits, number of open bounties, and the dollar values for those. I know this is like probably not that accurate, but like a lot of bridges don't rate 5 right now. Pretty much like I think 90% of all bridges. So like I think it's like a pretty good proxy. And if like people actually try to do this, we would be in a slightly better position. Yeah, perfect. Sweet. I can go into the proposal itself and how we started thinking about these things. So to start from, like, there are like over the last like 6 months or about a year, a bunch of chains have popped up, and the interest in like cross-chain communication has also increased exponentially. And we've seen like multiple designs come up, and a lot of times there's a lot of confusion around like what how this bridge works. So it's useful to start with like a base model, right? So the base model is this, right? The base model is every bridge. There are message bridges. So message bridges are essentially things that allow you to send data from one chain to the next, right? And that's it. right? They don't make any comments about what data this is. The only thing that they do is like take arbitrary amount of bytes from one chain and send those arbitrary amount of bytes to the other chain, right? These message bridges, they provide security to everything that's built on top, right? So any application that's built on top of the message bridge is inheriting the same level of security as the message bridge itself, right? Going on top, you will see I've like kind of outlined a couple of things here. Essentially, I call everything built on top of these message bridges as like applications on top of message bridges. So during the talk, if I say application on top of a message bridge, like you can kind of assume those are things like token bridges, NFT bridges, governance bridges, where you can sit on one chain and kind of vote on a governance proposal on another chain. Lending bridges, which allow you to do like fun things like deposit your asset on one chain and borrow using that as a collateral on another chain. ENS bridges, buy a ENS name on Arbitrum, use the ENS name on Optimism inside a smart contract. So all of these are kind of applications that leverage the underlying message bridge, right? So they are essentially kind of built on top, right? I might also refer the message bridges as messaging infrastructure, just to kind of not use the bridge term again and again. But so yeah, like we have token bridges on top of a message bridge, but on top of token bridges, there is another application sometimes, which we call liquidity networks, right? So these are essentially cross-chain token swap protocols. We'll get into all of this, but this is like the general hierarchy of things that we thought would be useful for people to understand before we kind of dive deeper into each of these things, right? Yeah. So essentially, we classify bridge type into two things. Is it a message bridge or is it a liquidity network, right? Because token bridges are closely tied to the message bridges, we consider them the same thing for this proposal, right? Some examples of message bridge, which might help, is roll-up bridges, right? For example, Optimism has Optimism Messenger, which is a message bridge between Ethereum and Optimism, which has the same security as a rollup, right? This messenger is what makes Optimism a rollup and not a L1 or an alt L1, right? I would also call Polygon native bridge message bridge because again, it allows you to send arbitrary amount of bytes from Ethereum to Polygon and from Polygon to Ethereum. So anything that allows you to send arbitrary amount of bytes from one chain to the next, I would put them in the message bridge section, right? There is AnySwap and there's XLR. Then we have things like liquidity networks, which I talked a little bit about before, but these are essentially cross-chain token swap protocols, right? And like a quick example for these things are Connext, which is built on top of Nomad Bridge. Nomad Bridge is also a type of message bridge. Hop on top of Hop Optimistic Bridge. So Hop has a weird mechanism where it's essentially a bridge that circumvents the native bridges of like rollups. We'll get into this, but yeah, Hop and Connext are like good examples of liquidity networks, right? Quickly checking into the questions here. Yeah, I would definitely call Stargate. I don't know if people can see the Zoom chat here. Do people see that? I can repeat the question otherwise.
We can see it.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, so I would definitely call like Stargate a liquidity network. Yes, it does not use like an atomic swap, but like, yeah. So let's also check out like the definition of both of these things real quick. So message bridges, it allows like flow of liquidity via messages across chains, right? So bridges that allow flow of liquidity via messages across chains, we kind of bundle them in the message bridges section. So bridges that swap already minted assets, we put them in the liquidity network section. So Stargate is a protocol that allows you to kind of swap already minted assets. So at no point of time, Stargate is like minting USDC or things like that, right? It's allowing you to, they have liquidity pools on both sides, and the message bridge is used to kind of like change ownership of who owes assets on a particular chain, right? But at no point are new assets being minted, things like that, right? So I would put them in the liquidity bridges section. They are like it's a trusted liquidity network. It's not trustless like atomic swaps would be. Hope that makes sense. Sweet. Moving on. Yeah. So let's talk about security and message bridges, right? Message bridges, again, to reiterate, things that allow you to send arbitrary amount of bytes from one chain to the next, things that allow you to build applications on top. All applications built on top inherit the security of the message bridge itself, right? So good. We can start with like a thing called Lifeline to verifying validity of the state, right? Pretty heavy kind of description, pretty heavy title, but it's pretty simple to understand. It's a lifeline that verifies validity of the state, meaning usually how lifelines work in, let's say, the IBC model or things like that, is that you as a chain, you receive a bunch of transactions. Now, when you receive a bunch of transactions, you can either run those transactions all by yourself and make sure those are computed correctly, or you can trust the consensus of the source chain, that if the consensus of the source chain says that it is valid, you consider that valid. If it says it's invalid, you consider it invalid, right? So lifeline verifying validity of the state. These are lifelines that verify each and every transaction. They compute these, or they compute these transactions themselves and make sure none of these transactions were computed in an incorrect fashion, right? A good example of these are rollups, right? So rollup is a lifeline to verifying validity of the state, mostly because every batch that a ZK rollup or an optimistic rollup posts on L1, in a ZK rollup, it's being validated each and every transaction is using the ZK proofs, and in the optimistic rollup methodology, it's being validated just because no one's kind of challenging it. But if someone does challenge it, each and every transaction would be validated in some sense, right? So we put rollups in this kind of in this bucket. And one interesting thing to note about this particular bucket, it resembles a lot like a full node in like a get or like blockchain node sense, right? So whatever a full node does, this bucket does exactly that, right? Because a full node also kind of verifies each and every valid state transition, and that's how it knows things are working as they should, as the protocol defines, right? Now that we go to like lifeline to verifying consensus, as I talked about before, these are extremely simple bridges that don't check validity of each and every state transition, but they validate consensus of the source chain. Examples of this would be Near Rainbow Bridge, Polygon POS Bridge, and Cosmos IBC, right? So in Cosmos IBC, we have these two particular chains. One chain receives, let's say, a state root of the source chain, and it validates if the source chain validators have signed off on the state root that they just received, right? If they find out that indeed like 2 by 3 plus validators of the source chain have signed this state root that I just received, they consider that state root to be valid and it gets processed, right? Now, why are these like both of these things in different buckets? Is because one of them has social consensus and one of them does not. Now, this is like a pretty important point, and this is the motivation behind Vitalik saying like future is multi-chain but not cross-chain. It's a pretty heavy topic. I'll just quickly check out questions and then get into that. Are we able to get a link to these talks for reference? Yeah, absolutely, man. Hope you were talking about these talks. Yeah, check it out. Okay, sweet. Yeah, so we are talking about social consensus and how that affects bridges, right? Let me see if I can find the comment Vitalik made real quick. Do you guys have it? Does someone have it on them? Otherwise, okay, no worries. Sweet. So the point Vitalik was trying to make, let's say imagine there are two chains and we're trying to bridge between them, right? Someone deposits, let's say 100 USDC on the source chain. We wait for some amount of finalization, and then we accept and then we mint 100 USDC on, let's say, Solana, right? The 100 USDC is now minted on Solana. People are trying to use it, depositing it on Solend and things like that. But suddenly there is something bad happens on Ethereum. Oh yeah, thank you so much. Something bad happens on Ethereum, and we have a hard fork now, which does not include the transaction where 100 USDC was deposited into a contract on the Ethereum side, right? So suddenly the 100 USDC that were present on Solana side are unbacked, right? They have no deposit on this hard fork that was socially created on the Ethereum side, right? Essentially, we can get into a similar scenario if Ethereum was ever 51% attacked as well, right? So any bridge that goes like beyond that, like, kind of goes below this, where like client verifying consensus or third-party validator set and things like that, anything like below this level is not safe to these kind of attacks. But this kind of a bridge is safe to this kind of attack because it's extremely closely tied to Ethereum, for example. And if Ethereum forks, everything else forks alongside with it, right? So these kind of models are like much more safer from like the 51% attack that Vitalik also mentioned before. Sweet. Okay, so I'll get into this like bucket where pretty much everything else in the space lies, apart from like a few that lie above this. So third-party validator set, right? So these are message bridges that are run by an external validator set, be it a multisig, be it a some kind of MPC scheme, be it a threshold signature. All of them kind of lie in the same bucket because essentially you are relying on something that's not the two chains for security, right? So the general idea is in bridging, what we call trustless is essentially you should not add more security, more trust assumption to the system than that are already imposed by the two systems you are trying to communicate between, right? So if you add any other source of like trust in the system, it starts going towards like a trusted bridge, right? Oh yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so Cosmos IBC with interchain security would be pretty interesting because that would resemble the kind of ecosystem we have today with like Ethereum and its rollups, right? With Ethereum and its rollups, everyone has the Ethereum security, and everyone is even socially aligned to Ethereum, right? We have a similar ecosystem developing on Celestia. We have a similar ecosystem developing on Polkadot. And if Cosmos does kind of get interchain security at some point in the next like 2 years or so, we will kind of get into a similar model there. But only if like people go through the hub itself, right? So I think it's kind of like an opt-in and not by default. So Cosmos IBC messages that go via the hub, all of them get the hub security, but Cosmos IBC that it's like directly connected between the two chains, they get like the security of each other, right? And this is, by the way, one of the reasons why the IBC model is not very scalable, right? Because yes, you can kind of connect to any chain, but as soon as you connect to a new chain, you are going into that trust bubble, right? So if any one of these chains that you connect to via IBC goes wrecked, your whole system kind of goes wrecked, right? Because the security of the system is the security of the least possible validator set, right? Yeah, RIP there, man. What to do? All good. Sweet. So yeah, these third-party validator set bridges are pretty easy to create, and that's one reason why we have so many of these, like Wormhole, Multichain, XLR, dBridge, Synapse, Stargate, all lie in this bucket. Yeah, like people do like weird things like SGX that Avalanche Bridge kind of uses to secure the thing. People use like threshold signatures, but at the end, you're just bringing like a whole new party that's responsible for providing security to your cross-chain messages. And whenever that happens, we kind of call it a third-party validator set. Then a bunch of people got a pretty interesting third trade-off. We put it in the bucket of optimistic validation. The Nomad bridge, which was attacked recently, kind of falls in this bucket. But the general idea is, instead of trusting like a honest majority assumption in a third-party validator set-based bridge, where you say things like, okay, if majority of this validator set is honest, then things are good. In optimistic validation, we try to bring in honest minority assumption. What that means is, even if one single party from the whole set is honest, things will be safe, right? So optimistic validation works pretty similarly how optimistic rollups work, which is we have two chains. There is a guy in the middle. This guy makes an attestation of like what's happened on the source chain, but this attestation on the destination chain does not get accepted instantly. Instead, we wait for a challenge duration. Um, Challenge duration always, the larger the better. But as soon as the challenge duration is crossed, the state root or like whatever message it was is considered to be valid, and you can start executing that and kind of complete your cross-chain transactions, right? So there are two key parameters here that we think are extremely important, and these parameters are like what people usually play around with. One is challenge duration. The larger the better, because it gives more time for the system to report frauds, right? And we've seen some kind of attacks happen on Ethereum before during its early days, where there was some kind of censorship attack or some kind of DOS attack, where people were not able to send transactions on Ethereum for a while. If we had these systems during like these optimistic systems during that time, and if the challenge duration was, let's say, 30 minutes or an hour, people won't be able to send like transactions that report fraud, and people would be able to like process a fraudful state root that's coming from somewhere else, right? So generally, when it comes to challenge durations, the larger the better. And a bunch of these systems don't have permissionless watchers, right? For example, like Nomad does not have permissionless watchers, meaning it's not like anyone can come in and report a fraud. Only a set of parties that have been given that privilege can, right? This is essentially the difference between an optimistic cross L1 bridge and an optimistic rollup. In an optimistic rollup, it's permissionless watchers in the final state, of course. When Arbitrum and Optimism get there, we will have permissionless watchers, meaning if like any of the sequencers kind of post a invalid state root on L1, anyone should be able to come and say, hey, that's wrong. Let's process it on chain and see if that's the right one, right? But in cross-chain optimistic bridges, this is unfortunately not possible. That's why these systems have a fixed watcher set. They have a permission watcher set, and same, the more the better, the permissionless the better, and things like that, right? Quick example of bridges that lie in this particular category are things like Hop protocol. So Hop protocol has a 1-day challenge period, and it's cross L2, and it relies on the native messaging protocols developed by these rollup systems, right? But they have a thing where they mint and burn HUSDC or like H tokens across chains, which are like synthetic tokens, and these are minted and burning at a frequency of 1 day and not 7 days, as kind of dictated by these rollup systems, right? So they reduced the challenge duration, and this was done because they wanted some capital efficiency out of the system and things like that. Connext, while the architecture of Connext, Amarok update and Hop protocol is quite similar, Connext uses the Nomad bridge, which has a challenge duration of 30 minutes. So rollups have set challenge duration of 7 days. Hop protocol got it to 1 day. Connext kind of reduced that to 30 minutes. And so on, like different systems, different parameters, but both of these parameters are extremely important. 1 second. Yeah, there are some like hybrid constructions. Yeah, probably a good point. Okay, let me expand on why watcher set have to be fixed in crossing bridges. It's quite a mouthful. feel free to ask questions. Happy to dive in deeper. Okay. So how this generally works is we have a source chain, we have a destination chain, right? We have messages on the source chain, and these messages, the goal of the protocol is to give get these messages from the source chain to the destination chain without any sort of corruption induced by any parties in the middle, right? So how these systems work is as soon as a user sends a message on the source chain, a party in the middle kind of picks up this message and posts it on the destination chain, right? So, and now the challenge period starts. During this challenge period, let's say, people can come in and they can challenge, right? So let's say someone comes in and posts a challenge on the destination side, right? So they come here and they say, okay, this state root that you posted, that this, let's say, let's call it a sequencer, that the sequencer just posted on the destination chain, it's invalid, right? But the destination chain has no way to calculate itself if the attestation was valid or not, right? This is different than optimistic rollups because there the sequencer posts the state root on L1 and the state root can be validated if it's correct or not on the L1 itself. So the fraud detection and fraud resolution, both of them happen on the same chain, right? But here, because we don't have light lines, the fraud detection happens on the destination chain over here, but the fraud proving can only happen on the source chain because only the source chain knows what's right and what's wrong, right? So if you open up the watcher to anyone, people would come in and they would kind of challenge again and again. And destination chain, it has no clue on how to know who is saying the truth. Is it the tester or slash sequencer or this new watcher, right? So they essentially have to constrain the watcher role such that the watchers can come and kind of pause the system on the destination side, and then the watcher has to challenge on the source side to kind of gain the bounty or things like that, right? So because of this watcher griefing attack vector that exists, because the source of truth lies on the source chain and not the destination chain, the watcher set has to be fixed in the current optimistic bridge design systems. Did that make sense, or do you want me to dive into something particular there? Okay. Could you have economic consequences for false challenges from permissionless watchers on L1? Example, slashing. Yeah, there are a particular ways we can kind of disincentivize this, but again, right? We are not the source of truth still lies on the source side, right? So even if you have some sort of economic scheme on top, we would have to do it in a way that's not on both of these chains, right? It would have to be some third validator set, for example, some third validator set which is only responsible for, let's say, paying out these watchers or things like that. Overall, I haven't seen a scheme that makes this work in its entirety with economic consequences and all. But I think this is still an area of active research, and I'm hoping we really kind of solve this kind of challenge, because if we had permissionless watchers during this nomad incident, I think we would have stopped the bridge in not 3 hours. It is kind of a hard problem that people are trying to solve at this point. Sweet. I can get into a couple of other things. One second. For some reason, I'm not able to scroll down. Okay, maybe now. Okay. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, let me use this one. Sweet. So far we've been talking about security for message bridges. Anything built on top of the message bridge kind of inherits the same security. right? And now we can talk about security for liquidity networks, right? So liquidity networks allow you to do cross-chain swaps essentially, right? So they would allow you to swap, let's say a Nomad USDC for USDC native on Polygon, right? So they would allow you to swap between both of these things. You still um, you still get the security of the underlying bridge when you choose to receive Nomad USDC. But these liquidity networks, they like operate on a level above, right? So message bridges have their own security, they mean their own tokens, the tokens inherit the security of the message bridge. But when we talk about security for liquidity networks, we're essentially talking about um, how secure is the swap itself, right? I think I have a good section here. Yeah, so we are essentially talking about answering the question of how likely is that the LP who accepts your deposit on the source chain, how likely is he going to run away from with your money, right? The assets that are being swapped, they still hold the security of the message bridge in itself, right? So there are a few ways to do like cross-chain swaps. We have like those kind of laid down here. But generally the flow looks something like this. You want to go from Polygon USDC to, let's say, Nomad USDC on FMOS, right? You kind of get into an agreement with another user or the market maker who says, hey man, we'll swap both of our assets, which means like I will take your USDC on Polygon and you can have my Nomad USDC on FMOS, and I'll do this whole thing for a fees, right? When cross-chain swaps happen, there are no assets being minted out of thin air, right? Only the ownership of already minted assets change, right? So nothing actually goes cross-chain. This whole thing is kind of happening on a layer above, right? So a bunch of ways to do that is via things called hash time lock contracts. These allow these two parties to kind of exchange assets without, without one of them having any fear that one of these parties will run away with their money, right? A couple of examples of these protocols were Connect, NXTP, Liquidity, and things like that. This system has been quite hated, to be honest, for the last like since it has been known. This is the reason why there is nothing out there right now that uses HTLCs. Like Connect, NXTP was a system that was using HTLCs, but going forward, they are moving to conditional transfers, right? There are like a bunch of reasons why HTLCs were considered bad. I think if you just search, you will also find like a presentation by Dan Robinson on why HTLCs are harmful and things like that. It's a pretty interesting topic. Check it out. Happy to talk about it offline. The second way to do like cross-chain swaps are conditional transfers, right? How it generally works is, again, right? Let's say we are on Polygon and the user, we are trying to swap between Polygon USDC and Nomad USDC. One is on Polygon and one is on FMOS, right? So what we do is we use, let's say, Nomad here, right? So we send a message from Nomad saying, I want to burn or like escrow my Polygon USDC on a contract on Polygon. And I want to send and I want to mint Nomad USDC on FMOS, right? This pretty much would take somewhere around like, let's say 30 minutes, right? So in these 30 minutes, any market maker, any user can come in and say, hey, I'll give you Nomad USDC on FMOS right away, and I'll take it from Nomad after 30 minutes, and I'll do this for a fee, right? So from the user perspective, he gets Nomad USDC in like 2 minutes, where the alternate was 30 minutes. And the guy who just gave Nomad USDC to this user on FMOS, he has to then wait for 28 minutes for the assets to finally arrive via Nomad, right? And he's essentially being like paid to wait 28 minutes over here, right? And this is like a pretty good UX because as a user, you send a transaction on the source chain and you get funds very quickly on the destination side. right? And the market maker, all he has to do is give you the assets right away on the destination, and then wait for 28 or like whatever time it takes, and kind of wait for the money to arrive from the bridge itself. So it's like a fast layer on top of a slow bridge. Uh, a bunch of protocols use this kind of a method to do cross-chain transfers. Examples of these are like Hop, Connect, Amarok, and MakerDAO Teleport, right? All of them use like a message bridge as the slow path, and a layer of like market makers, routers, bonders, whatever you may want to call it, to kind of make cross-chain asset transfers faster. Then we have this like third thing called external validator. This is very similar to like what we saw in the message bridge scenario. Here also we kind of trust that this third party will give me money on the destination side. The failure case for this event is like there will be a loss of funds, right? A particular example of this is Binance, right? So if you deposit money on Binance, you are hoping that Binance will actually credit it to your account on Binance, right? This is not the case with conditional transfers or HTLCs. The worst thing that can happen in an HTLC is that your funds are locked for an expiry period, whatever that might be. The worst thing that can happen in a conditional transfer is that there is no liquidity provider, and you indeed have to go via the slow path, and that's like 30 minutes to 7 days, depending on the underlying message bridge. The worst case in an external validator-based liquidity network is that your funds are lost, right? I would put Stargate in this as well, right? So if you deposit into Stargate from Polygon, you are trusting the Oracle and the relayer, layer 0 uses, to kind of relay that message on the other side. If they don't, your funds would be lost, right? So yeah, this is like a bit about security, and like these like different kind of bridging methodologies, right? Then we can look into other things like censorship resistance, liveliness failure, who provides the liquidity here, what's the upgradability like, what are the permission actors, volume transferred, things like that. But things get a lot less hairy from down here, right? So far, like, yeah, this is quite a mouthful, I think. Yeah. Let me just have a quick look if there are any questions. Sweet. Sounds good. I don't know how much time we have left.
Yeah, we have additional time. I have a question,
Okay.
actually. You had mentioned like the potential of like monitoring to potentially help with the Nomad hack. Do you mind going into more detail on some of the research that's going on with that?
You mean like monitoring? Sorry, do you mind repeating?
Yeah, like I think York's poking out in the chat, like watchers.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is something that hasn't been like spoken about publicly yet. So Nomad has this system of permissioned watchers, and they have to allow people to become a watcher, right? So at the time Nomad got hacked, it had only one watcher configured per chain. And the watcher stopped the system after 3 hours from the time it started getting hacked. Now, these watchers were not configured to kind of detect these kind of failures. These watchers was just configured to kind of detect invalid state roots that are posted on chain, right? But what I'm trying to say is, if there were more watchers in the system, we could have stopped the hack much sooner, right? This is obviously something that seems easy in hindsight, but I feel we should have definitely had more than one watcher, to be honest. And yeah, of course, like a more generalized detection framework, that's also absolutely needed. Like if we observe at like so many of these hacks, a lot of them are just happening because there aren't any good monitoring frameworks across chains, right? People are not running any monitoring software that allows them to detect an hack is happening and like automatically pausing the system. I think Third Chain has one that they recently developed after they got hacked like 4 times in a row. but we need more of these systems to kind of like secure these kind of bridges. And we should like, I think it's high time now that we start adding some like gauges, some rate limiting to these bridges as well. If any bridge tries to withdraw more than 100 mil in, let's say whatever, like 20 minutes, maybe it's a good idea to add some kind of rate limiting there that, we start like slowing down these withdrawals in some fashion. But it's clear that we need like more monitoring tools, more people who can take action once the monitoring tool has detected something bad is happening. And yeah, hope that makes sense.
It does. Thanks.
Okay. Sweet. Yeah, happy to kind of get into a bunch of other things here. We also wanted to talk generally about like, okay, we have these systems, these bridges. Almost all of these bridges, like blockchains cannot communicate directly with each other, right? So almost all of these systems have a party in between who is like, who in the best case scenario is just sending data across chains and is just working like a relayer, like a gelato relayer, a keeper, a chainlink keeper, or a system like that. Best case scenario is like these relayers are not adding trust to the system. The worst case scenario is that these systems are providing the providing security to these cross-chain messages, right? But there are these off-chain systems, and we wanted to talk about, okay, what happens if these off-chain systems go offline, right? So we talk about a bunch of these systems. We look for the consequences of switching off the bridge, right? And I would love if, someday we could get to a place where users demand bridging providers to like shut down their infrastructure, and we can then, could kind of clearly see what happens when these systems actually go off. In some systems, the slow path will be activated and there will be no loss of funds, right? Systems like these are, like let's say Connect, Hop, MakerDAO, Teleport, yeah, a bunch of systems like these, even like the near Rainbow Bridge. These are like an example of like, systems where slow path would be activated if like this, like the off-chain actor goes off. Then there are systems where if the current infrastructure goes off, then anyone can, kind of sell stake, join the network, become a validator, and process all stuck transfers, right? So while this is extremely costly, depending on like what validator set you are joining, funds are not lost, right? So it's still not that bad, right? The third one is frozen, right? Meaning like if a bunch of validators or a bunch of like these off-chain systems get shut down, the system is paused. Anyone who has deposited money on the source side has lost their funds, and the bridge cannot, process these transactions, cannot or does not want to, right? So frozen here could mean two things, right? Frozen could mean that the validators want to run away with the money, or it could mean that the users have lost the money, right? Users will definitely lose money here, but who takes the money, that kind of depends if it's a bridge hack or if it's a system failure. If it's a bridge hack, all the hackers take the money. If it's system failure, no one gets the money, only the user loses this money, and this money is like locked on contracts forever, right? So I think we will kind of highlight these things as well in the general, kind of framework. Then we look at like things like censorship resistance, meaning, if you deposit money on the source side, is there something that allows you to feel safe from these bridging providers censoring your deposit, right? We have these schemes in rollups where there is an escape hatch on L1, and you can send your transaction directly on L1, and then the sequencer has to process this transaction, right? But apart from rollups, I haven't seen a lot of bridges provide this, to be honest, and I'm not 100% sure on how this would even work. But it's extremely, I think this is like a pretty important property that if bridges have, it would be great, right? Because then people don't have to have any trust in the off-chain actors that the bridge protocol is running or, is required. Then we kind of, talk generally about like, if there is liquidity required for the system, is it unlimited? which in case of token bridges, it will be because, token bridges can mint native and canonical assets. But if not, then who is providing liquidity? Is it permissioned? This is, I can also kind of, talk more about examples here. So talking about unlimited, AnySwap is a good example. AnySwap is the canonical bridge for a bunch of tokens, and they can mint these canonical tokens out of thin air so that they have no requirement for external liquidity, right? But whenever you use AnySwap to send USDC across chains, they cannot mint native USDC on the destination chain. Hence, they have to depend on external liquidity providers to provide liquidity here, right? And any LP can provide liquidity here, so it falls in like the permissionless section. Then we also have this permission case because in this case, only like a select few people can provide liquidity. And I think the only bridge that falls in this right now is Hop. So Hop runs bonders, and bonders are essentially bonders need to have liquidity for the system to work, right? So if bonders run out of liquidity, you can do nothing about it. We saw this happen in real time during Arbitrum Odyssey event. People were trying to send a lot of money from other ecosystems to Arbitrum, and Arbitrum and like Hop had no liquidity left, right? Even though they had liquidity in the AMMs that they use, the Hop bonders had no liquidity, and no one could, join the bond network and start providing liquidity. So all the users could do is wait, right? They were still pretty safe because Hop has a slow path that was activated, meaning like they would get the funds eventually, after a day, but for now they would just have to wait. And this was like a pretty bad UX, right? So we want to kind of highlight these sort of things, as well in the framework. Then we talk about things like, what's the upgradability situation like? How does the system upgrade? This is essentially where a lot of these systems get fucked up. This is what we saw with Nomad as well. Then we talk about like, what are the permission vectors? Then we talk about things like, what are the tokens supported and things like that. I think from our perspective, our final goal is to, kind of align on if this general like classification makes sense. Once it makes sense, we can start like creating something like L2Beat already has for L2s. We will love to kind of, do something similar for bridges. And once we get to that part, we will start showing how secure a bridge is right over here. And that's our ideal state. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. Happy to answer questions. I think there is one. The next MRO has an xcall function to call any function of any contract on the destination chain. How does this fit into one of the buckets of the framework, or is an extra bucket required? So Connect's MRO has an xcall function, but that xcall function is a wrapper over Nomad's messaging protocol, right? So it actually break this down into like permission calls and unpermission calls. So all the permission calls, they go via Nomad, and xcall then becomes just a wrapper, for like Nomad messaging protocol. And in other cases, when it's an unpermission call, I think at that point, Nomad routers can execute that for the end user, right? We do not have this thing in the framework itself because this is pretty, I think only Connect's MRO kind of lies in this bucket, and we did not have any other bridges that do this. So it did not make a lot of sense to create like a whole new bucket for this. We also excluded another protocol, the Mina protocol, because it's a singular messaging protocol that does things very differently from others, right? So Mina protocol lies somewhere in between like light client validating state and light client verifying consensus. And this is, yeah, since it's the only thing that lies in between both of these, we did not create a bucket for it as well. And we are talking about this thing in the forum here. Check out the conversation for some more context. Yeah. Sweet, yeah. I think, yeah, this was pretty much like everything on my mind that I wanted to kind of chat with you guys about. Yeah, what do you guys think? Want to talk about something else? Yeah.
Yeah, are there any questions from the audience? If not, we'll wrap for today, but we'll pause for any final questions, comments from the audience.